Okay, so today we're fortunate to hear from Dr. Mitchell Allen. Mitchell Allen is a research associate at the Archaeological Research Facility at UC Berkeley. He has a Ph.D. in archaeology from UCLA in 1997 and taught that subject in 5 universities. Currently, he is writing up the results of a legacy survey project, the Helmand Sistan Project, Afghanistan, of which he was a junior archaeologist in the 1970s. In addition to his work in archaeology, Allen spent 40 years as an academic publisher, including founding and running 2 independent scholarly presses, AltaMira Press and Left Coast Press, which specialize in archaeology. Allen researches and writes on archaeology, scholarly publishing, and qualitative research, ethnic dance, and related subjects. He is a recipient of awards from the World Archaeological Congress and 3 other scholarly organizations. So welcome, Dr. Mitchell. I'm Dr. Allen.
Nick, thank you. First of all, can you hear me? And can people who are not here hear me? Yes? Okay, say it's good. Okay. I need a little light here. There we go. So any of you who've done field surveys know that you find all kinds of stuff and you have no idea what they are because you found one of them. Well, I was involved in this project, the Helmand Sistan Project, which I'll tell you about in a moment. And we found these little markings on ceramics, and as they kept adding up, it became apparent that when we got to publishing them, we needed to say something about them. So I am not a specialist in the Tamga of Central Asia, and hopefully there's some people here or listening in who do know a lot more about this than I do, because I could certainly use all the help that I can get on this. To make the things more difficult is most of the work on Tamga has been written in Russian, which is not a language that I read. So those of you who may know comparative materials that I don't, again, that would be most appreciated because I can't necessarily read it. Okay, see if it'll move. It's supposed to move to another slide, but it's not doing it. Let me try this. There we go. Okay, let's see if it works now. So simple marks affixed to ceramics and other forms of material culture appear almost everywhere in the ancient world and in the modern world as well, and have been a staple in archaeologists' attempts to assess or to ascertain meaning of artifacts. In the various systems, they're called legal signs, they're called household signs, potter's marks, identity marks, a whole bunch of things. And as such, they're related to seals and coins and inscriptions as a way of getting to an emic understanding of the culture that's involved. In Central Asia, there are labeled Tamga, which is the Turkish word, or Nishan, which is the Persian word. I will use Tamga here, since that seems to be more commonly described. And they appear in large numbers throughout the steppes, beginning in the Bronze Age and stretching all the way to the present, where they're still used often as branding marks on animals. They're most common beginning with the last few centuries BCE and the early centuries CE, which is the time period that we've been talking about. Finding them in quantity in southwestern Afghanistan suggests that we look to Central Asia for the source of them, even though potter's marks like this are found all over the place, including the Middle East, including South Asia, including the Indic civilizations and elsewhere. Numerous theories of what these things mean have been suggested, again, largely by the Russians. Particularly important in Central Asia has been the suggestion that they represent clan identities or clan properties. Individual or family ownership marks is another possible meaning for them. Sometimes large nation states use them to identify and track government properties or materials, and also as symbols of political power by placing them on monuments, inscriptions, and coins. They've also been suggested to have numerical value, that they're numbers of some sort. Recent research has shown that many clusters of Tamga are found in conjunction with religious sites, another possible avenue toward their meaning. Certainly, identity, ownership, symbols of power, accounting, religious representation, that's a lot of different meanings for that same set of materials. And the question was, can we add anything to that from our materials from Sistan? The fact that we found 200 of them in the Helmand Sistan Project only complicates this, because there are suggestions for each of these theories, as you'll see as we go along. Today I'll describe what we found and where, what patterns we've seen in the signs and the materials on which they are associated, and how this might inform the studies of Tamga and Nishan by archaeologists, historians, and philologists. First, a bit about the project that we're talking about and about the region called Sistan. Sistan is the southwest corner of Afghanistan, where it borders on Iran and Pakistan. The name comes from Sakistan, the land of the Saka, and we'll talk about the Saka a little bit later. It consists of the lower reaches of the Helmand Valley, the Helmand River, which is the largest river in Afghanistan, which starts in the mountains to the east and empties into a broad delta and into the Hamoon Lakes, which is on the border between Afghanistan and Iran. This rich river valley is surrounded by deserts on all sides, but of course, it represents one of the main courses, main pathways between Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and Central Asia. Of particular interest is the Sarotar Plain, which is now a desert located east of the main Helmand area, but and has been abandoned since the 15th century, but in ancient times was an intensive agricultural zone fed by large canals from the Helmand River at various times, especially during the centuries that we're talking about, the last centuries BCE and the early centuries CE, the time of the Parthian and the Sasanian empires. A lot of our Tamga are found in Sarotar, which is why I mention it. For those yet not familiar with our project, the Helmand Sistan Project is the only long-term comprehensive survey and excavation project ever conducted in Southwest Afghanistan. Our fieldwork started in 1971 and ended with the Soviet invasion in 1979. Oops, wrong way. Let's try the other way. There we go. We identified over 200 archaeological sites in the region, and we created the first archaeological chronology. And the time period, again, we're talking about is what I have listed in red here from like the 3rd century BCE to about the 7th century CE. While we've produced sporadic publications over the past 50 years, we're currently trying to synthesize and systematically produce the findings of the project, which are now obviously long overdue. And we also have developed a website, sistanarchaeology.org, in case you ever want to take a look for a more summarized version of what we're doing. We're submitting our materials to the National Anthropological Archive of the Smithsonian in due time. There are no archaeological projects in southern Afghanistan that we can identify that have turned up as many of these ceramic marks as we find in our project in Sistan. Even here, while we find these at 24 different sites and a variety of different places between sites, vast majority of them come from 3 specific places: the site of Sayak, a pair of sites called Khwaja Kanur and Mukhtar, and a site called Lat Kala. And those are all marked in red there. Khwaja Kanur up there, Lat Kala down at the bottom, and Sayak in the middle. Sayak was excavated in 1975 by us and produced significant evidence of being a cultic site dating from the 1st century BC to the 3rd century BCE to the 3rd century CE. Contains fragments of a Western style temple and possibly 2 on top of a hill just outside the Helmand Valley. Domestic areas and a storage compound fill out the site, and numerous pieces of stone and baked ceramic showed influence of Western design motifs, and you can see those here. We assigned a date based upon a Greek and Aramaic inscription, upon several C14 samples, and upon the ceramics to the time frame that we have given it. Khwaja Kanur here on your, oops. Oh, there we are. Khwaja Kanur here on your left is a mound on the hill above the confluence of the Helmand and the Arghandab rivers, just south of the modern city of Lashkargah. The site produced similar materials, cultural materials, as you can see here, but produced almost no architectural elements. Other than the mausoleum of a recent Islamic holy man, suggesting the artifacts came from somewhere else and were placed on the graves by visiting acolytes. Nearby Mukhtar, the one on your right there, is a likely source of these artifacts placed in Khwaja Kanur, since some of these things actually come from Mukhtar and not Khwaja Kanur. The majority of the Khwaja Kanur pieces that have Tamgas on them actually were not found by us. They were part of a private collection of a man named Owen D. Mort Jr., who is an American engineer working in Lashkargah, and for numerous years collected these things by local people who brought them to him. We have about 40 of them from Mort's collection. And though he said they came from Khwaja Kanur, although we can't verify that, obviously, because they came from being looted from some archaeological site, but very likely from the area around Quadricandur, Lashkargah, Kala Beast, which is the big archaeological site there. Lot Kala is another one we excavated in 1975, and it's a 15-meter high mound that was dated, the earliest material comes from the Bronze Age and runs through the Sasanian period. We found almost no Western style, Greek style architectural elements there, but we did find a collection of Tamga, as I'll show you in a little bit. Many of the other Tamga that we found were found at sites that we called kalas, which are the local word for fortresses, that date to a period just after these Parthian 1st century BCE to 3rd century CE sites. These all seem to date from the Sasanian period, and we find parallels of these sites in the 5th to the 7th century CE elsewhere in the Sasanian Empire. So we have a pretty good likelihood of those being dated to that, and we found 26 of them at 14 different Kala sites. So it's not just a random thing. It's likely that they were being used at that time in these Sasanian fortresses. So to be able to fix these things more closely, we did manage to find some of them in excavated contexts. And I'll start with those to give you some idea of where they were found and the security with which we can give them dates and possible functions. Well, the area A of Sayak, which was that first site I described, was a domestic area that had lots of rooms with lots of cooking materials, lots of storage jars, and so on and so forth. And in the middle of it, room 5, there, we found 3 different Tamga onsherds located in there. Sorry, moving along here. One of them was found beneath floor level 2, which had a carbon date on top of that floor of the 1st century BCE, so it has to date prior to that. The other 2 were found slightly higher, but all 3 of them seem to date probably to the 1st century BCE or slightly after that. The interesting thing about them is that these 3 characters are unique in our corpus. The bottom one here looks like half of a swastika, which is something we find common, but it's only half. So we don't know whether it's the same symbol cut short or whether it's a different symbol altogether. Area A, which again, this is domestic area, also produced another Tamga, different room. And then area F, which you can see up there, the upper right, produced 5 different ones. And notice that most of these are ones that are very familiar ones, very common ones in our collection. These slash lines, again, the swastika, which appears often, and the sort of box with a X or a cross or whatever it is inside of that. These are all pretty common figures, and these appear in area F. Unfortunately, that area, the field notes for that never were found, so we don't really know where in area F they were found, but they were excavated from under the ground in that area. Area B was an area that seemed to have storage jars in large quantities, and therefore was very likely to have been a storage area, possibly the treasury for this Western style temple that we found sitting on top of the hill. We found one complete vessel in a hoard that has sort of a curved, moon-shaped kind of mark on it, which may or may not be a Tamga. But more importantly, we did find in situ a jar sticking at the latest level, which would make it to the 2nd or 3rd century CE. And that rib jar, is very common. You can see the ribs, you can see this, and on the right there, you can see a Tamga mark with a upside down V and a slash mark, which is among the more common of our markings. Lot Kala, again, because we excavated it vertically, we don't have any idea of the architecture there. We don't know if there was a Western style temple there or anything else, because all we have is a 4-meter wide trench. But we did find in one Parthian layer, we found 1 mark, and then on the surface level, see the sort of surface fill there, we found 4 others. but again, they were associated with Parthian pottery and therefore probably date to that time period since they were mixed in with everything else that looked Parthian associated with it. So we do have these things in stratified context. So we know that they actually did come from these time periods, from the time frame that I was suggesting, because these things were found in situ in archaeological excavation. The ones that we found that are later that associated with the Sasanian colors, none of those were excavated. Those were all found on the surface. So we're assuming that they're Sasanian, which makes them half a millennium later than these, but we can't really prove it. But the fact that there were 14 different sites that had these suggests that these Tamga were also used in the Sasanian period as well as in the Parthian period. So where on these vessels do these appear? Well, you saw that vessel that's in situ, where it's located on the shoulder of a large storage jar. You can see the same kind of storage jar with the same ribbing here. Here's the rim, and then there is a incised mark on them. So that particular style, that the storage jar with the Tamga on the shoulder is very common. What's important here is that in almost every case, these Tamga were inscribed prior to firing. So there's intentionality involved here. They were put there before the storage jar was completed, therefore they were designed to be this way. Vessel bases are a little more complex because we find a whole variety of vessel bases. You can see little ones, you can see big ones, you can see some that were decorated, most of them were not decorated. They were located, the Tamga marks were on the bottom of these vessels, and they range from small cups that were highly decorated to large storage jars with perhaps 10 centimeters in base. The bases can be flat, they can be disc bases, there's a whole set of varieties on them. But the fact of it is that of the 37 that we found on bases, 34 of them were incised prior to firing. These were intentional. Now, these are obviously smaller, they, for the most part, are smaller vessels than these big storage jars, because certainly if you want to use it for identity or anything else, you have to pick it up and turn it upside down. And you can't do that with these large storage jars because they were embedded in the ground, they were very large. So these are all smaller vessels and these were used, but that suggests possibly a different function than the storage jars. So again, we're now complexifying what these things mean. From this Mort collection, again, we don't have a concrete source, although the Mort claimed they all came from the site Quadricanur. We don't have, we didn't see all of them. He had them all. He sent us pictures of them. He sent us notes of them. We don't have information on all 40 of those that he found, which is a huge amount, but again, if they came from Quadricanur, that creates a large corpus of them from that one particular site. But his claim is, and what he showed us, that almost all of them are located on the necks or shoulders of these horse figurines. There's a couple that are located on the flanks, but for the most part, they're located on the necks. And again, as you can see, they are inscribed prior to firing. There's an intentionality here. For the other kinds of things that we had, we found them located on goblets. These were drinking cups of various sorts. They were fine pottery, highly decorated, and the various different characters were inscribed on these. But as you can see from these, almost all of those were inscribed after firing. So we have a bunch of them that are pre-firing, a bunch that are after firing, relating to different shapes. So again, it's a much more complex thing than saying, oh, we have this, here's the shape, here's the material, here's the intentionality. These things are all very, very different. There are other kinds of objects that we found, but we found them in very small quantities, so we can't really come up with a pattern. But again, they sort of split evenly between things on handles, things on spouts, and between all of them, about half of them were pre-firing, and half of them were post-firing. So, what are these characters? What do they represent? Well, the largest single group of these characters are characters that are of one sort. They're either parallel lines or parallel wedges that might or might not, but probably do represent lines. And these little V shapes or sometimes a U shape very often upside down. These are the most common things that we found of the percentage of all these Tamga that we found. This is the most common motif that we found. Various combinations of V's and lines. This happens to match the numerical system of the Parthians, who were ruling this area for this period of time. These little marks tend to be ones in Parthian. The V's or the U's tend to be tens. And then occasionally we found something that looks like a Western number 9, which represents 20 in Parthian numbers. So again, these look like this might be a numerical system of some sort, representing, this is a 5 and a 1, representing 6 somethings inside that jar. But we also know that the people in this area were using multiple scripts. So just identifying everything according to Parthian script may not be enough, because we found a bilingual inscription that is in both Greek and in Aramaic characters. And so we start looking at some of these, and some of these very much look like Greek characters. We've got 2 Tamga that could fit very well in any kind of Greek inscription, and then also a bunch of characters that fit very well the Parthian alphabet as well. So do we have 2 alphabets plus numbers? This gets even more complex, because a bunch of these don't represent anything that could be remotely resembling a letter. Swastika, for example, was not used in any numerical system that we know of. There's these large curved things, and there's these trident things. Again, these are not letters and numbers, but they are symbols, and they're found very commonly in Central Asia, where this whole source of Tamga come from. Let me give you just more examples of the kinds of things that we found that seem to be one-of-a-kind kind of things. Khwaja Kanur, the site that only had the Muslim shrine on top, produced these kinds of characters, again, fairly unique, although also we found things that looked like the trident there. Sayak has a whole bunch of them. Again, we have 100 different ones, and some of them seem to be unique almost to themselves. This one gets repeated several times. You'll see again in a minute. And the Sarotarkalas, again, which probably date 500 years later, 300 to 500 years later than the other ones, have a whole different set of symbols, although some of them, like that one's repeated. So is the same system being used over this long period of time? Are we talking about 2 separate systems, one from the Parthian era and one from the Sasanian era? And if so, why, if they're separate systems, why are they overlapping? If they're the same system, why are they not the same? Because the most common marks, the little slashes and V's, don't appear in the Sasanian column. As you can see, we're solving the problem of the Tamgas really quickly here. There are other complex designs that were found not in any site at all. I like the little fish, is he's my favorite. But again, we don't know what these all mean, but they don't seem to match any single system that we talked about before. Identity marks, letters, numbers, they seem to be a melange of kinds of things. There are a few of them that might be inscriptions, and this one seems to have 3 or 4 characters. That one has 3, and so on and so forth. I can't read these languages. We've asked for help on one of them, but if any of you know these linguistic systems, I would love your help to be able to try to figure and sort these things out and see if they are inscriptions or whether they're just decorative marks. Who knows? The Mort collection has a lot of their characters matching what we have, but they also have a unique set as well that don't match other symbols that we've found. And in fact, we do have one case here, maybe more, but one case that I could easily identify, the sign of Shapur the first king of the Sasanian dynasty, located on a shirt. Again, it gets right above the ribbing marks and right below the neck, matching everything else. But this one seems to be very clearly tied to a royal designation. So, having now found all this stuff, I started looking to try to find parallels throughout Western Afghanistan, southwestern Afghanistan, to see if there's anything else that could help me sort all this stuff out. And of course, what I ended up finding was almost nothing. There are a scattering of these things found in other archaeological sites, but only a scattering, and only 1s and 2s, not dozens or hundreds, which is what we found in at least site, and many more found at other sites. So Kandahar, which was excavated at the same time our project was, they came up with a couple of things that might be Tamga. There's also described a bunch of inscriptions, but they didn't publish them, so I don't know what they look like. They may or may not, if they're inscriptions, they may be longer and not Tamga. Mundagak, which is another famous archaeological site, in which the last period stretches down into the first millennium BC. We have the same kind of trident that we have, and three or four others, but three or four others. And Mundagak, again, was excavated extensively, and if there were a lot of them, it's likely they would have found them. Walter Fairservice, an American archaeologist, was there in the late 1940s, early 1950s, and did an extensive survey over 2 seasons, and he came up with one in all of his looking around. This little leaf thing, and it doesn't match anything that we have. And then Nadia Ali, which was excavated in the 1930s by a French team, they came up with one. This particular one here, but we know that their excavation stretches into the period that we're talking about now. But even so, they only have one published Tamga from all their excavation, and that's pretty much everyone who's worked in Southwest Afghanistan. That's it. If you go across the border to Iran, which Sistan region is divided between Afghanistan and Iran, we find more at one site, Dani Gulaman, which was thought to be the Achaemenid capital of Sistan back in the time of the Achaemenid Empire, and they find a bunch of them, but they're all the same single character. This little trident thing with a circle on it, you can see all of those are all the same character. So they're found in reasonably large quantities, but it's only one character. And if you can remember back to the one we found here, the Nadia Ali one is identical to that. So this one very likely is probably an Achaemenid piece that matches the ones from Dahani Gulaman. So we had to look a little farther because there's almost no, and we looked for other kinds of things. Kui Khwaja has been extensively excavated. And the time period matches ours. Almost nothing there. Kala Islam, which was excavated by the Italians in the 1960s, there are none or almost none there. So if we're looking at all the other parallel archaeological sites in this whole region, we don't find the kinds of quantities that we have found in Sistan, which of course just makes our job harder because we have to figure out a reason as to why these things are there. When we look farther into the Central Asian system, things are easier to find. Tamga are found commonly starting in the mid-first millennium BCE and stretch through the mid-first millennium CE. So the time period we're talking about, they're very common. And the Saka, for whom Sakistan is named, later Sistan, our area, occupied this area in this time period. So if we look at Saka sites north of the Hindu Kush, northern Afghanistan, and the other stands to the north, we find whole bunches of Tamga. For example, Tel Khorazm, the excavator there, Baratov, came up with, I think, 400 different symbols in his various excavations. The most common, the most closest time period would be this Kumbus Tepe level 4, which is in Khorazm, which is sort of at the a delta leading into the RLC. There's lots of them there, and lots of them are similar to the kinds of markings that we find in Sistan. If we try to add to the religious nature, we look at several of the Saka sites in Khorazm and have found, again, these Tamga in these sites. At this one site called Toprak Kala, the high palace there, they were found on bricks. Again, we find them on ceramics, but these were found on bricks, and we find them with the same kind of vertical lines, the same kind of slashes that we found very, very commonly. Baratov, the excavators there, claim that these may have been a way of accounting for who was making enough bricks and the quantity of bricks that were being made. But again, the slashes are the same kinds of numbers that we find on our ceramics, and so there may be a parallel there. If we look at Kalaligir, which is a hill fort with a shrine on it, that site, again, dating to the late BC time, Many of the characters that are found there are the same ones that we have in Sistan. And then also in the same region, there are all kinds of barrows that were used for burials by the Saka for over a span of hundreds of years. And again, some of these things have Tamga on them, and a lot of the Tamga match the ones that we have there. So the Saka and these particular sets of Tamga seem to work pretty well together. So, and that we can talk about them possibly being a religious connection, which is one of the theories that are brought up, because the Tamga the Saka found in Saka sites are so common. And again, most of what we found appear at two temple sites in the Helmand Valley that look like they have or had Western temples on them. So what does this all mean? Well, I'll get that to next. But anyway, here's the theory that we're coming up with, which I would welcome anyone who knows more about this to suggest others. The signs that we found show up in the 2nd century BC after the Saka, at the same time that the Saka move from the area up here in north of the Hindu Kush, are pushed out by other nomadic peoples, the Xiongnu and the Yutsi, and are pushed west up to Khorazm up there, where we find some Saka materials, and then pushed south into Sistan and later into northern India. All right. Where they become parts of the Indo-Scythian Empire. Passing through Sistan, using these same types of signs, it makes a lot of sense that, well, they are probably the people who brought them to Sistan. But why are they mostly associated with, I'm going to use the word Greek, although people in Central Asia don't use the word Greek now, they call them Western style temples. Why are they associated with what we think of traditionally as Greek architecture, Greek designs, Greek this, Greek that? Well, let's go back to the site of Ai-Khanum, which is located up north of the Hindu Kush. This site was destroyed by the Saka and other nomadic peoples around 140, 145 BCE. And even though it was reoccupied after that time period, it was occupied at a much lower level and occupied with a much smaller population. And there became a much more of an intermixture of nomadic material culture with the traditional Greek material culture, which was there. For those of you who are not familiar with Ai-Khanum, the site has Greek amphitheaters, it has hippodromes, it has Greek temples, it has Greek inscriptions, it has Greek documents that are found there. So that it was the center of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom north of the Hindu Kush, and was finally destroyed around this time and not reestablished. So, but what happened to the people who lived in Ai-Khanum? Some of them came back. We have the post-glacial period of Ai-Khanum where some of these people came back and rebuilt on a much lower level, or a much more simple level, the kind of architecture that was there before, and reused the architecture that was there before. But what happened to the rest of that population? I mean, the traditional thing. There's a wave of conquest. Everyone gets murdered, and then it's all over. But now here you have people who have these Western elements in their culture, and you have the Saka who are nomads, and the Saka are migrating south. Did some of these Ai-Khanum people migrate south with them? One piece of evidence that might support this is the fact that in the post-glacial period at Ai-Khanum, we start finding Tamga in equal quantities or larger quantities than we found prior to the destruction in 140, 145-ish. And you can see these Tamga here. The archaeologist who does the ceramics there, Bertille Leonette, who's a really brilliant woman, generally tried to connect these signs to Greek characters. Some of them work pretty well. Some of them, like this set of slashes, work a lot more for what kinds of things that I've been talking about. In any case, if some of this population moved along with the Saka to the south, what's the next river they run across? Well, this side of Ai-Khanum was on the Amu Darya River. Then they come to a river just very similar, a little bit smaller than the Amu Darya, but located in western Sistan. Let's build our houses here. Let's build our temples here. try to reconstruct this Greco-Bactrian kingdom in a much simpler way at these sites along the Helmand River, because they couldn't live along the Amu Darya River anymore. And so our hypothesis is that the fact that all these things are found, all these Tamga are found in Sistan, has to do with the migration of the Saka and bringing with them some of these Greco-Bactrian refugees who then reestablished their life along the Helmand River and created these Western style temples, retained their Western style architecture, and mixed with all of the Western materials that they had, mixed what they were learning from the Saka, which include these things called Tamga. Anyway, in summary, these Tamgas, there's a large collection of Tamga. They find thousands of them in Central Asia. And as I showed you, we found almost none farther south in Sistan. They're used over a long period of time. So it's very possible that they were used for multiple reasons over multiple periods of time. They're locally made, and the Tamga were pre-planned. There's not like some just decided to scratch the name on it. These things were done by the potters prior to firing for the most part. They're on different parts of different kinds of ceramics, but they're on a lot of different kinds of ceramics. So it wasn't just a specific kind of offering that was being used here. We don't really know what these characters mean, and the various theories that they were letters, that they were numbers, that they were clan symbols, or that they were dynastic symbols, all those seem to show up in Sistan. So we can't clarify any more simply what those things actually might have meant. We don't know the function of these things. We don't know how they were used. We don't know what people were saying about them when they saw them or why they were putting them on there. But is likely their connection to the Saka migration, giving the time frame and giving the location or the path of the Saka migration and where these things show up. And maybe, just maybe, they were related also to the Greco-Bactrian kingdom and its destruction just prior to this time period in Sistan, in Central Asia. Anyway, go visit Sistan if you want. It's still dangerous right now. But for sure, go visit our website, sistanarchaeology.org, if you want to find more. I have a few of the Tamga up there, but for the most part, you've just seen them. And then certainly no project is work of one person. This project is 50 years in the making. I was in Sistan 50 years ago, digging holes in the ground. I was the young guy who had to carry all the heavy stuff back then. Now, if I was back, I would be telling other people to carry all the heavy stuff. Anyway, but we have had a lot of support over a lot of years, both in the original archaeology and in the attempt to try to finally publish this stuff 50 years late. So apologies to all of you who've been waiting for this stuff for decades. It's just finally now getting published. Anyway, I'm done. I'll be welcome any questions. Uh-oh. I was afraid of that. Go ahead.
Selfish because I have to get going. Thank you for the talk. Loved it. Very exciting to kind of see this work. So it's ceramic-based question, and they're connected questions. And the first is, the first thing you showed me, and you're like, this looks like, to me, it looked like 1 liter. Were those marks, as you're thinking about vessel size and reconstruction and completeness of your ceramic assemblage, were those marks correlated to vessel type, like oyas?
Can you have the same, if you have a vessel of a certain size, was the mark the same on each one of them?
Yeah.
We only have 2 complete ones.
Okay, so vessel completion is really low then.
Yes, in most cases we have a shirt, and
Okay.
the shirt has, we might be able to figure out the rim size. We might be able to estimate the size of and I haven't tried to do that yet.
And that one
but
shirt
that's an excellent idea to try to do that.
And that one shirt is n equals 1 for vessels.
Yes.
Okay. So that would be my next question, which is if you have less vessel, or if you had an assemblage of ceramics in which your vessel completeness is unknown because they're probably one-offs, n equals 245 for 245 shirts.
Yeah.
If you have fewer of those marks in your assemblage, it makes me think about the kind of stuff that I would see in say New Mexico, where things that are of specific, like the marks that are on a pot may be a piece of, polychrome decoration or something like that.
Okay.
If you showed one that actually had a drill hole on the same shirt,
Okay, those tend to be different. Those are repairs.
True,
Yeah.
usually.
But you're
But-
right. No guarantee.
But I've seen several of these kind of little iconographic elements retasked as two things. One is either ornamentation, and I've got shards that are all greased out and rubbed down because somebody's wearing it good a lot, right? Or into gaming pieces, which made me think of Barb's talk, right, where she was showing us the double happiness chipped out into little gaming pieces. And I was curious if these things actually end up in their second life as shards, again, going back to vessel completeness, as a secondary use because they're kind of common potentially at some point.
Okay, well, one, if they were inscribed prior to firing, a secondary use is not what they were planned for. You don't inscribe something prior to firing, planning on it being broken and used as a gaming piece later on.
Not the
Right.
potter themselves, but the consumers, right? They buy these things and they go, okay, now I've got a bunch. Oh, damn, Junior just dropped the pot, but we can still use.
That's entirely possible on some of the sites where we have one, but the site where we have 100 of them, that's a cultic site. That seems less likely. Not impossible, but as you can see, I've created no possible help to the resolution of what these things are and what they mean and where they came. Because we have elements of every one of those theories, or seem to have elements of every one of those theories as to what Tamga mean in our collection of Sistan.
Sure.
Thanks so much for your talk. It's a really cool collection of objects.
Thank you.
I work in the Greek world. I'm a Greek archaeologist. And do you think it's possible that some of the marks represent prices? Because in the Greek world, a lot of the inscriptions that we have on pots that are really short like that are prices, especially on the bottom of cups. I know that you said the goblets are incised post firing, which seems to me to be kind of like this is my cup, right? Like maybe a personal marking.
I'm assuming things like that.
But some of the things that are on the base, I wonder if that could be a price, because that's where the price inscriptions show up in on Greek vessels.
Well, the ones that look like numbers,
yeah,
that's a possibility.
That's what I was thinking.
But that's again, that's less than half of them when you put them all together. I mean, there's a bunch of other characters, and again, we can't disassociate these characters the fact we find a lot of the same characters up in Central Asia, and it's pretty clear that even though it's a smaller corpus, smaller range of characters, it's likely there's a connection between. I'll just pick the trident, for example. You find tridents in Central Asia, you find tridents here. It's not a number of any known thing, but it's likely that symbol passed through, and probably not as a price. And the other thing is, these things are found at the largest chunk of them are found at 2 cultic sites. So are the priests at the Greek temple, at the back door selling,
They actually are.
I believe you that they probably would be, yeah. But that's that's if we again that's not impossible. I can add that to the list of possible meanings of all these things. But again, they don't all match that idea. Some of them do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean,
that's great. That's great.
Yeah, the
great
cultic site also is interesting because another thing, again, I don't know much about Central Asian archaeology, but at least in the Greek world, often the pots are inscribed to whatever deity, right? I mean, they're given as votive offerings. So I don't know if some of these symbols, if you could look at, I mean, I don't know if they represent the god or the deity who the vessel is being given to. That seems like another possibility, but I don't know about dedicatory.
And then again, why are some on the shoulder and some on the base and some on the handle? And there's no you don't have a consistent. If it was just these 2 sites and they all sort of follow the same pattern, that would be make it easier to come up with a system.
Yeah.
But they're all, and again, with my lack of knowledge of these particular kinds of marks from all the people who've studied them in Central Asia, I'm kind of at the beginnings of trying to figure it all out, and hopefully somebody from the Russian community who studies this stuff is listening in and can tell me exactly what these things are, because I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, it would be really interesting if this is also this kind of habit of making the Tamga. I mean, you showed Iconium, which for Greek archaeologists is this kind of emblem of these hybridizing practices in Hellenistic Central Asia, right? Where you have like a Greek theater and an inscription from the Delphic oracle, but also a lot of kind of indigenous architectural styles and all of these things. So it'd be interesting if this practice is also hybridizing in certain ways, that it includes elements of, I don't know, but it's really fascinating. I've never seen.
Well, hybridization is likely because again, the Tamga things are very clearly Central Asian.
Yeah.
I mean, and you found them in all kinds of Central Asian places. And 90% of Central Asia has nothing to do with anything Greek or anything Western. And then here at these two sites, one of them has 100, one of them has 50 of these things that are very Western looking sites, but they have very clearly Central Asian Tamga. Yeah. So hybridization is exactly the perfect word for it.
Thanks.
Mitch, archaeology is all about ambiguity.
Oh, thank you. You just saved me. Thank you. Once again, you saved me.
So celebrated. Imagine it. This may be a rabbit hole you don't want to go down, but I was struck by the fact that you started talking towards the end about the migration and the movement of people, especially going into northern India. And I don't know if you're familiar, but just recently there was a very controversial report or study reported about the ancient DNA of the people in India, where they came from and come from. And I don't know whether the time scale of what, I mean, I didn't, all I know is that it was very controversial because it showed that well, let's put it this way, the current Prime Minister of India, Modi, would like have everybody be homogeneous and from his Hindu stock. But this report showed that it was not the case, that there's an awful lot of diversity of backgrounds of people in different parts of India, which I think we all knew anyway. But
yeah, all archaeologists were stunned to hear this.
Right,
yes,
right. Anyway, but it might be something that would add to your migration thing to look.
Yes, well, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on in northern India after this, and whether so there's some relationship there, but I got to finish writing this survey report first, and then I'll worry about things like that.
Right.
But yes,
Right.
But that's excellent.
Right.
Idea.
But I think looking at some of those wider contexts, and I mean, I think that's so hard for so many archaeologists to accept the fact that people were very mobile, even if you thought they were, agriculturalists or whatever. But people are on the move all the time, and I think we have tended to underemphasize that. And I think what you've got here is some people on the move, and also exchanging things with people, perhaps, and that you may have a network where people, I mean, it's quite well documented. There's a famous antique research that was done about the Hopewell interaction sphere in central US, where you could, if you looked at certain things, it looked like everybody was integrated, but on the ground, everybody was living a different kind of lifestyle. So you may have something like that going on, right?
I won't rule out anything, but that makes perfect sense.
But
thank
ambiguity.
You. Ambiguity. Thank you. Anyway, the answers are ambiguous. Thank you, everybody. Any other questions?
That's everybody. Do we want to double check in case there's any? A hand.
Hi, great talk. Thank you very much. I just wanted to note, I work with the Gans collection of seals in the melt department here, and we have a lot of Tamga seals from the Sasanian period. I don't know if they'd be directly relevant to what you're doing since it's in a different
I would love
medium.
to see them. Absolutely.
You would okay, that was going to be my
Let's talk.
Yes, sounds great. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep.
If there's no further questions, we can double check on Zoom.
Oh, I didn't even look there.
No worries. I think not. So I think.
Thank you. Anyway, thank you all for coming and spending your lunch here. Appreciate it.